ISIL says it's behind a suicide bombing which killed several people in Saudi Arabia. It targeted a mosque used by members of the security forces. As ISIL sharpens its strategy and steps up its attacks in the region, what is the armed group trying to achieve? And can it be stopped? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Sami Zaidan. On Thursday, 15 people were killed in one of the worst attacks against Saudi Arabia's security forces. It all happened in the southwestern town of Abha. That's close to the border with Yemen. The Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, or ISIL, recently increased its attacks inside Saudi Arabia and other countries nearby. Most of the victims from the Abha attack were members of the security forces, and this isn't the first time ISIL has targeted them. The armed group detonated a car bomb in the capital last month near the country's maximum security prison. 2 security guards were wounded in that attack. On June the 26th, ISIL bombed a Shia mosque in Kuwait, killing 27 people. ISIL also attacked a Tunisian hotel that same day, killing 38 people, mostly British tourists. And ISIL claimed responsibility for 2 separate suicide attacks on Shia mosques in Saudi Arabia at the end of May. 25 people were killed. So how real is the ISIL security threat in Saudi Arabia and nearby Gulf countries? And are the strategies in place to combat ISIL actually working? Let's bring in our guests to discuss this. In Jeddah, we have Ahmed Ali Ibrahim, a specialist on Saudi Arabia and a political and security analyst. From The Hague, Moin Rabbani, co-editor of Jadaliyya and former head of the political affairs at the United Nations Special Envoy to Syria. And in Washington, D.C., Hardin Lang, a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress. Welcome to you all. If I could start with Moin. So how much of a threat is ISIL to the Gulf region, do you think? Is this latest attack really highlighting what's been building up behind the scenes for a while?
I think so, and I think this attack is meant as a message from the Islamic State movement that it is not interested in any form of tactical alliance with the Gulf states and Saudi Arabia in particular, and is really out to gain a foothold in this region by appealing to the sentiments of those who feel disenfranchised or otherwise alienated by the prevailing regimes. I think this should be seen as more than just a revenge attack or seeking to do something spectacular. I think we need to understand this as part of a broader strategy of the Islamic State movement, seeking to establish a presence now in this part of the Middle East as well.
Ahmed, there are some security questions here. Moin talks about them trying to gain a foothold. How did they get inside an Interior Ministry compound? How did they attack, a place that houses elite counter-terrorism troops? What's going on with security there?
Well, obviously, this is obviously it's a remote area in Abha that you wouldn't think that any kind of attack will happen. It's based in the south. There's no sectarian threat to it. The majority of the people in that region is basically Sunnis. And what happened is, for the unofficial news right now, the person who detonated himself, he was wearing the uniform, and he actually did pray with the rest of the soldier. By the last sujood, he basically detonated himself. So these kind of breaches, if I may say, it happens in each and every probably airbase around the world, but sometimes they take it for granted and they let these kind of things through or slip a little bit through to the base. I think this is a lesson that the Saudi emergency forces gonna learn from, and the other forces. Security is already beefed up on a very high alert. A lot of mosques are being secured and censored from anything. Today is Friday, and we do have the Friday prayer. and thankfully, crossing our hands, it went smooth. So security is going to be changed from now on.
So hang on, Ahmed, this sounds, from what you're saying, it sounds like this attack has been something of a game changer for life in Saudi Arabia now. Security being stepped up everywhere?
Yes, it is. Security will be, or it's already been stepped up everywhere. I'm sure the MOI and the other bodies of agencies within Saudi Arabia, they are coming with emergency plan and permanent, semi-permanent plan in order to counter, these challenges that Saudi Arabia has been facing. If you see the attack that happened yesterday is actually targeted a complete change in the game of ISIL, targeting mosques and different sectarian people. They thought, or they preached to their followers, is to attack the Shia in the eastern province, and now they are actually change it to just basically attack anybody who's in military uniform, regardless of whether he's a Shia or Sunni. So that definitely is a game changer. Saudi Arabia is going to beef up security, is going to take major steps, but Sami, as you know, this is not enough by itself alone. It needs the whole world attention. It needs the international community attention. It needs the regional countries.
We will get into
attention.
that, Ahmed, about what the suitable response should be. But on that point which both you and Moeen have raised there, I'd like to pick the thoughts of Hardin now and say, Moeen was saying earlier, we shouldn't just look at this some kind of isolated revenge attack. Then what is it? If the goals are changing here as well as the tactics, what is the new goal for ISIL now?
Well, a couple of points. I'd just like to pick up on the thread of your last guest. One of the things that bears noting in terms of the significance of this strike in Saudi Arabia is the fact that the Saudi authorities had just gone through a massive operation where they had picked up 430 people plus who they thought had been associated with ISIL or other extremist groups in the country. So it's significant that we have an attack of this nature, sophisticated, targeted counterterrorism, like an elite facility of the Interior Minister, and that it happened right after there was a massive sweep in which Saudi basically thought that they had netted most of the people who would be a threat.
So clearly that doesn't seem to be the case now in light of what's happened.
Yeah. Exactly. It's going to raise some questions about sort of where we are with internal security inside of Saudi Arabia. I'm not suggesting that it's a significant threat to the kingdom or the stability writ large, but they are going to have to go back and review some of their security measures and probably ask some hard questions about how well they have real good tabs on people who might pose a threat inside of their country. But to your other question about what does this mean, and is this like a new objective on the part of ISIL? I mean, my sense of this is it's not really a new objective in the sense that one of their goals writ large has been to show momentum consistently across the battlefield. Right? So in Iraq and Syria, they exploded onto the scene last year. Been there for quite some time, but it was the fall of Mosul and other dramatic military victories that really breathed life into the movement as a regional force. And at the moment, there hasn't been a decisive push back against ISIL, but they're having a harder time showing that kind of success on the battlefield in that theater. So these kind of dramatic, spectacular attacks in the region, in Europe, elsewhere, this continues to show a form of momentum for the group.
All right, so coming back to that point, let's pick it up maybe with Ahmed. Do you think that they're just ISIL is simply trying to keep momentum, to keep itself in the headlines here, or do they have bigger plans for Saudi Arabia? Do they actually want to take over Saudi Arabia rather than keep themselves confined to their self-declared caliphate between Syria and Iraq?
Well, they can dream on taking care, Saudi Arabia, but this won't happen. They just want to be kept in the news. They want to show that they can survive, and in my opinion, they're probably at the neck of the bottle. Now Turkey is moving the troops from the north with the alliances of the Americans. I think they are going to be hit hard very soon, and I think they are trying to prove their existence, and maybe we will hear some other operation that they will conduct in some other parts of the world, God forbid. But back to the security, internal security in Saudi Arabia, the Ministry of Interior has been doing a great job of preventing many operations of attack. I can be 100 times secure, but if it's one time that passes through, it's God will. Saudi Arabia, it's basically a huge peninsula, and it has a lot of empty land, a lot of tribe, a lot of people. It's very difficult to contain this, but I think the internal security in Saudi Arabia has been doing a great job, not only internally, also by tipping off other agencies in the United States and in the United Kingdom and the rest of the world on potential people who they are flagged in Saudi Arabia before any other international country. It's a challenge that Saudi Arabia is going through, and we're going to come out of it very strong.
Moeen, they may be trying to keep themselves in the headlines, but when it's being reported that ISIL leaders are now telling Saudi followers to stay in the kingdom rather than to come and fight in Syria and Iraq, isn't that something of a deeper tactical change?
Yes, I don't think this attack is either about just being spectacular or about trying to take over Saudi Arabia. I think what they're trying to achieve at this stage is to destabilize Saudi Arabia, to promote a sense of insecurity among Saudi Arabia's rulers and citizens.
Why, Moeen? To achieve what?
In that context, conducting a... Well, I think, again, that just as they have established themselves in Iraq, in Syria, in Libya, in Sinai and elsewhere, they're now trying to establish themselves in Saudi Arabia, and particularly, I think, in the Hijaz, in Western Saudi Arabia. But, if you're trying to create this sense of insecurity and destabilization, you could do a lot worse than to conduct an attack at a military base in what is essentially a war zone near the border with Yemen, and it kind of exposes a lot of the weaknesses that they're trying to take advantage of and heightens that sense of instability and insecurity. I think the other thing that they're trying to do, as you know, they emerge from a particularly austere interpretation of Islam that I would argue is entirely alien, not only to 1400 centuries of tradition in most of the Arab and Islamic world, but even within significant parts of Saudi Arabia. Nevertheless, this is a tradition that now has, particularly since the mid-70s, a growing number of adherents. And one of the side effects, if you will, has been that in recent decades there has been growing discontent among people that they feel that this tradition is somehow not being implemented properly or is being betrayed by those in charge of its propagation, mainly the ruling elites in the Gulf and particularly the Saudi royal family. And I think that the Islamic State movement is also seeking to capitalize on this form of discontent, and not only, let's say, more traditional socioeconomic or political forms of discontent and marginalization.
All right, that's a good point. How do you confront discontent then? And Hardin, I mean, it's easy to sit back for us and say, obviously the Saudi security forces didn't do the best that they could have done. Look, a bombing has taken place. But who has found the appropriate security answer to ISIL? I think Friday night marks 1 year since the US-led coalition began bombing ISIL. Is that campaign really working either?
Well, let's go back to the first part of your question in terms of who's found the appropriate security response to ISIL, the appropriate manner through military or security means to manage the problem. Now, sort of setting Saudi Arabia to one side for a second, one of the things that's really been fundamentally lacking in the strategy of the coalition, to a certain extent in Iraq and definitely in Syria, is the political component. I mean, at the end of the day, one of the reasons why ISIL has had such great resonance, particularly in Iraq, is that the Sunni Arab population has no real stake in the future of the country. And we see Prime Minister Abadi now undertaking a series of measures, things called functional federalism, in an attempt to decentralize more control to the provinces. And this is part of an attempt to sort of reach out a bit to certain parts of the Sunni Arab population to bring them back into the fold. But it's probably too little too late, and a little bit too it's not visible enough to people on the ground. They don't feel it. So there's got to be a real deep rethink on the part of the coalition about how they approach the politics of this problem. It's not something that you're going to solve militarily alone.
You say that there is a real deep rethink going on, or are you calling for that? Because frankly, it's difficult to see.
No, I think there needs to be. I mean, you hear a lot of talk about it now, like in recent weeks and months, and some of the testimony you've seen up in Capitol Hill by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs here in the United States. There's a recognition, right, that politics needs to play a much greater role in the process, but there isn't really a political strategy, a deep political strategy in Iraq, and certainly in Syria. There's next to no political strategy that goes with this, and partly because the problem set is just so incredibly difficult.
Coming back to Moeen then, it sounds like we have a very complex problem here that can't be tackled either on the basis of country by country or simply by focusing on one approach, security. What are your thoughts, Moeen? Can this battle be won without tackling the situation in Syria, the situation in Iraq, tackling political vacuums as well as the security approach and all other kinds of issues here?
Yes, I think all of the above, but perhaps more importantly, the point I would like to make is that I find it a bit bizarre to see the United States presented as leading the solution or even an important part of the solution. I mean, let's not forget, it was the U.S. invasion and occupation of Iraq and its premeditated destruction of the Iraqi state and premeditated deliberate dismemberment of the institutions of the Iraqi state that created the vacuum in which all these groups, first Al-Qaeda in Iraq, now the Islamic State movement and others began to emerge. So I think we need to have just a little bit of context and modesty and historical awareness when we discuss these issues. Having said that, I would then add that more foreign intervention, I mean, have we learned nothing? More foreign intervention is only going to make things worse. And I think what is really required
who needs to intervene then,
Moeen? That is well, ideally, this would be done without more Western bombs dismembering yet more Arabs and others in the Middle East, because I think you don't need to be a rocket scientist to figure out that that has probably been a primary recruiting tool for these movements. And the other thing I would say is that it's also the pattern of supporting autocracy and repressive governments, irrespective of the price of oil, over the past half century or so, that is equally responsible for the growth and development of these movements, partly in the context of the Cold War, where the United States resolutely stood behind these crazies
I was going to say,
with the Soviet Union. And
let me give Hardin a chance to come back on this before we move it to Ahmed.
Sure. I mean, I couldn't agree more about the point about how a great deal of this is all linked up with the invasion of Iraq by the United States in 2003. I spent a couple of years there between 2003 and 2005. And the invasion, he's correct, your guest is correct, completely dismembered the state institutions and the structures in Iraq. And so it's, that's one of the original sins here when we look at the nature of the problem that we're facing. And I also couldn't agree more that this is not about the United States or the coalition, the Western members of the coalition, somehow coming and solving this problem. It's not about using Western military force to solve the politics of Iraq or sort of the politics of Syria. If we learned nothing from Iraq when we had 170,000 troops there, we couldn't fix the politics. So this is really a question fundamentally for the Iraqis to solve. There's also, though, a regional component to this. There are countries in the region that can play a more constructive role in the politics in the region. Right now, tensions between Iran, Saudi Arabia, the rest of them are playing themselves out there. And we really need to see the region step up.
On that, hold that thought. I want to take that thought to Ahmed. When we talk about how perhaps countries in the region, authorities in the region need to step up to the plate to take the responsibility, can they do that if they are the very authorities, whether we're talking religious authorities, political authorities, state authorities, which seem to be losing credibility amongst Sunni populations? Isn't that the basic crux of the problem here? Authorities, whether it's statehood, is losing credibility in the eyes of parts of the Sunni populations in the Middle East. And they're resorting to very extreme groups like this because they don't find themselves in the authorities which are established.
I agree to a certain extent that some of the glory that it's putting into ISIL is basically people look at it as the savior of the Sunni populations, thanks to Al-Maliki regime before then Mr. Al-Abadi, if he's doing anything constructive to contain the Sunnis in Iraq. Listen, the United States of America invasion into Iraq definitely started to trigger this whole disrupt in this region, and the exit plan, as usual, it wasn't the smartest exit plan that the United States did. So in result, now we have a problem that we need to deal with, and this problem is not only based for the region and for the region. As the late King Abdullah said it before he dies, he said those people is going to bomb the Middle East, the next month they're going to bomb Europe, and they're going to reach to America. And actually it happened.
Ahmed, but my question is, who can step in though? Because some of these guys, some of whom are Saudis and blow themselves up in Syria, before doing so, release videos calling on fellow Saudis to attack even the scholars in Saudi Arabia. So who can talk to these people credibly?
People that needs to talk, that we need to start within Saudi Arabia and the GCC country and the rest of the, to the commission of scholars. They need to reinvent themselves. They need to come up to the current pace of this world. They need to help in actually promoting the right ideology of Islam. They need to work hard in updating what's happening right now, or through the past years they were in a pause mood. Things are going well, we don't need to rock the boat, and a lot of regional countries actually has been spreading the wrong thoughts to those young populations that's in Saudi Arabia that's taking advantage of that. So we need to do a lot of rethinking within Saudi Arabia, within the GCC country. We need to work for the country, and everybody needs to, understand that religion is something that's sacred. You do it at home, you don't take it to the street, or you don't push it in somebody's face. Today, Saudi Arabia is more united than anywhere, with all the sectarians that we have in the whole country, with every color, with every background. Today we are much stronger, Saudi Arabia, and I think after this bombing, or after this era right now that we're passing, the difficulty of this grief that we are going through, things is going to be changed in Saudi Arabia.
Right, I'm glad you mentioned that.
From an ideology.
Ahmed, let me jump in, because I think we got about a minute and a half. One poll published by Al Hayat News in July 2014 found that 92% of Saudis thought ISIL conforms to the values of Islam. Another poll by the Fikra Forum, carried out in October, a few months later in 2014, found that 90% of Saudis held a negative view of ISIL. Now, Muin, are they winning or losing the PR battle?
The sorcerer's apprentice is on the loose, and it's going to be a very long and sustained campaign to arrest and reverse this. I think the question that needs to be asked is, are those who in various ways bear responsibility for the emergence of these phenomena, are they capable of dealing with it? I would argue that their role can only be containment in the short term. The long-term solutions are much more along the lines of what you were proposing at the beginning of our discussion. It goes to fundamental issues that all governments in the region, every single one of them, are simply incapable of dealing with, and it needs a whole new form of politics, and that's nowhere near on the horizon, unfortunately.
Let's end on that thought, a whole new form of politics, something positive, hopefully, to end on. Let's thank our guests, too. In Jeddah, Ahmed Ali Ibrahim; in The Hague, Mu'in Rabbani; and in Washington, D.C., Hardin Lang. And thank you for watching. As always, we're keen to hear your thoughts too. Just get in touch via our programme page on aljazeera.com, or post your comments on facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or you can tweet us too using @AJ Inside Story. From me, Sami Zaidan, and the whole team here, for now, it's goodbye.